but yeah, I just had to turn on. Just wait a couple minutes for people to come in, and
okay.
Be sure to hit the record. Are you recording already? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to edit that.
So either way, once we're done, we'll post it on social media and all that, so folks can share it.
Yep. Hey, we got our first attendee.
Well, why don't you just let us know, since I can't see what you see, so let me know when you'd
Sure.
like us to start. All right, thanks. Well, and thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. I'm Alan Parry. I'm the state political chair for the North Carolina Sierra Club, but it's my pleasure tonight to be here to moderate a panel discussion, not about politics, but about urban agriculture and its importance in our communities. And this is brought to us by all three of our triangle-based Sierra Club groups, the Foothills Group, or excuse me, not the Foothills Group, the Headwaters Group in Durham, the Capital Group in Raleigh, and the Orange Chatham Group in Orange and Chatham and Alamance County. So welcome everybody. And we have a great panel of speakers to talk about this subject tonight. Three of our great Sierra Club endorsed elected officials who I'm pleased to have a chance to talk with. And I guess I'll kick it to you all to introduce yourselves. You'll do a better job of that than I will. So Natalie, you wanna start us off?
Sure. My name is Natalie Murdock, and I am the new senator representing Durham County. So I am a daughter of North Carolina, born and raised. Greensboro is where I got my start. But before that, I want to start with my ancestors, where I came from. So my grandfather was the farmer in Caswell County. So my mother grew up on a tobacco farm. So we have deep, deep ties to agriculture, as do so many North Carolinians. So I have that same tradition, and was always someone that just was passionate about environmental issues. My mom, when she joins me to stump for me, she loves to tell the story of me, digging through the trash when my parents could not figure out how to recycle, and me explaining to them what the symbols meant from like second and third grade, just from, being active in school. But fast forward to the power of education and getting children excited about environmental issues and agricultural issues. So that is one of the reasons that I ran for Soil and Water District Supervisor. I served in that role, and was pretty active in working with General Assembly members, passionate about working with Black farmers as a result of my lineage and legacy and connection to farmers, concerned about loss of land owned by Black farmers who have been cheated out of their land for years, as well as industrial hemp. So other types of industries. I'm really passionate about working to diversify agriculture, and you learn really quickly. A lot of power is in the General Assembly. So a seat opened up, and I was encouraged to run, honestly, because of my passion for environmental issues and agriculture, being that I'm a young woman of color. I'm 36 years old, and folks were excited about me bringing a different skill set and perspective to that body. So in March of this year, won my Democratic primary, was sworn in on April 1st. And my current committee assignments don't align with that passion, but some of them, but not all of them. But it is my goal in 2021 to work my way onto the Ag Committee, for us to form a separate environmental committee as well, and to advocate for our farmers, to advocate for the Department of Agriculture. Excited about some potential changes coming with that division, and look forward to working with some folks here on that. And also, we'll get into it a little bit later, also caught the bug through interning. I interned for an Economic Development Commission. And as an intern, we literally ran up to legislators as they were getting off of the plane in Asheville to talk with them about agribusiness and value-added industries, and how you can combine agriculture with economic development. So had the opportunity to work for a food incubator that was connected to let's see, the Buncombe Tech, the community college, the Inca Candler College campus for the community college in the Buncombe County area, and worked out there with entrepreneurs that were passionate about value-added products. So you've named it, I've dabbled in it, and at the same time, we also had a grant through our Council of Government a few years later to work with farmers as well. So had a lot of exposure to the issue, and I'm passionate to continue to do that work as a state senator, and look forward to the discussion this evening.
Thank you, Senator Murdock, and thanks for being with us tonight, and thanks for making the decision to join the General Assembly. We're awfully glad you're there too.
Thank you.
We also have with us Jenna Wadsworth, who's both an elected official and a candidate. So Jenna, take it away.
Hey y'all, my name is Jenna Wadsworth. I am the Democratic nominee for North Carolina Commissioner of Agriculture this year. I actually grew up on a hog, cow, chicken, corn, cotton, tobacco, and soybean farm on a dirt road in Johnston County. So I'm an Eastern North Carolina girl, don't hold it against me. And some of my best and earliest memories were out on the farm. I remember the first time I got attacked by guinea hens because I decided to befriend their chicks. And so the hens chased me through the fields of tobacco angrily. I remember what it was like the first time my daddy made me climb up on a farm all 100 and run rows. To this day, he and I still argue about how straight those rows were, but that is a different story for a different time. And I remember what it was like sitting with Granny on the back porch and the screen porch, and a good old like wooden chair that actually came from a one-room farmhouse that we had just sitting around, and shelling snap peas into those big old metal wash basins, which I also inexplicably have a whole bunch of baby pictures being bathed in. And so, you know, agriculture was a way of life for me. I'm still very much involved with the farm to this day. My father and I run it. We rent the bulk of it, and part of it's in forestry. But we did over 45 rows. I mean, each of them over 50 linear feet long of fruits and vegetables this season alone. I was actually just there Sunday night. And so in my other room right now of my house, I've got tomatoes lining the windowsill that are still ripening. I've got melons sitting in a milk crate, and like my sink is full of stuff, of colanders full of everything from okra to banana peppers to jalapenos to chili peppers. So I absolutely love agriculture. It's so much of who I am. I love to cook. I see that as an extension of my love for where our food comes from and our food systems and the work that our farmers do. And for the last 10 years, I've been elected in Wake County, where I serve as vice chair of the Wake Soil and Water Conservation District Board of Supervisors. And actually with my first election in 2010, we made history when I became the youngest woman ever elected to any political office in the state of North Carolina at the age of 21. And I share that because I think it's really important to realize, because we hear this a lot, the young people, oh, you're the future. But I would argue that we're not just the future, we're also the now. Senator Murdock can attest to this too, as well as her former colleague, the Durham Soil and Water Supervisor, Danielle Adams, who was my mentor and was the reason I ran for soil and water, and her mom, who was the first African-American woman to ever serve on a soil, to ever be elected to a soil and water board in the state, mentored and supported me. Seeing young women, seeing young people, they are capable of making real change in your community starting today. And that's something unbelievably to me I've been doing for a decade now as a soil and water supervisor in Wake County. And we've worked really hard to transition all of our farmers to best management practices that allowed them to put conservation first, while also still being economically successful and profitable so they can continue doing what they love to do, which is farm. I co-authored the county's agricultural economic development plan, which created a viable pipeline for farmers to get their products to market. We also did a lot with our conservation districts to allow farmland to stay in farmland for the foreseeable future. And I know there's a few bad actors down east, and sometimes people, when they think about farms, they think of those big corporate farms, and they think about water issues or environmental and air quality issues or people who aren't good neighbors. But I'll tell you, the bulk of farmers across the state, all they want to do is be a good neighbor. They want to be a good steward of their natural resources. They know if they don't take care of the land that they have, that they won't be profitable for years to come. And so, I think through the work that we've been able to do in Wake County to begin to revolutionize farming, to create tests, like work with different private partnerships to create test farms, because one of the biggest barriers to becoming involved in farming, especially if you're a person of color or a young person, is being able to afford the land, being able to afford the equipment, being taught the skills and resources necessary. So we've created places where that can happen, to be able to increase the amount of urban agriculture happening, and reduce food deserts, and talk about all of that. And I know we're going to talk about some of that tonight. But I'm proud that we still have roughly the same number of farms in Wake County today that we did when I first took office a decade ago, despite all the developmental pressures, which means that we're doing things that are working. Not just that, we've made significant financial investments in environmental education programming in both our public and private schools. And that's something that's really been a focus of mine, because I know it's our children who have to live with the brunt of our inaction on climate change unless we begin to elect leaders from day one who see addressing the climate crisis as an urgent priority. And that's another reason why I'm running for Commissioner of Agriculture, because my opponent does not believe that climate change is real. And I think that's a dereliction of duty on his part. I think that it's one of the biggest issues, not just facing everybody, but especially facing the agricultural industry. And so we need real leadership. We need it now. Our children deserve it. The people of North Carolina deserve it. Our farmers deserve it. And I look forward to getting to talk to you tonight about more about why I'm running and how that relates to urban agriculture as far as supporting our small family farmers, creating new market opportunities, including reforming the hemp licensing process, which right now is extremely discriminatory, especially to communities of color. Talking about cannabis legalization as not just an economic opportunity for farmers, but a social justice opportunity for our communities of color again, and an opportunity to give rural communities a hand up. And then, addressing climate change, talking about farm bankruptcy, which is increasing, talking about food insecurity in our children who are hungry in a state where we grow so much of the nation's food, and talking about bridging the urban-rural divide. There's very big issues that we're seeing that are creating massive disparities between urban and rural communities as far as broadband access and healthcare are concerned. So I'm really excited to be here tonight, and I'm thankful for the opportunity.
Well, thank you. And now for our final panelist is my own county commissioner, Penny Rich. Penny, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I am Penny Rich. I'm the chair of the Board of County Commissioners in Orange County. And I did not grow up on a farm. I grew up in the city. And, for me, farming was a pot and dirt and one tomato. And, we had it made. We got a tomato out of the deal. And so, it's interesting. I lived in New York City for a good portion of my life, and then started moving south and came to North Carolina in 1998, and realized wow, how lucky we are to have so many local farmers. And I know Jenna just talked about Wake County not losing any of their farms, which is really important. But Orange County actually gained farms. If you look at the triangle, Orange County is one of those counties that has done really well over the past 8 years that I've been a county commissioner, with over 100 growers locally. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but something that happened during COVID is when the grocery stores started closing and people were afraid to go to grocery stores. Our farms kicked it up, and they started delivering boxes of fresh produce, and where they were delivering to the restaurants were no longer open. They were delivering directly to the folks out in our community. And so, people really took a liking to that, and I think are going to continue supporting farmers. It's so important. We also use some of our sales tax dollars to create an ag program that supports farmers. And we just completed one of our first rounds, the 2021 round. And we've awarded grants, 70 grants totaling $540,000 to farmers. So, Jenna talked a little bit about the money, the land, the equipment. We do have the Breeze Farm in Orange County, and that is an incubator that NC State helps us run that teaches young people that want to learn how to farm to do it. So important, because not everybody is lucky as these wonderful women to grow up on farms and learn from their parents, but they do want to be farmers, and they need to understand how to do that. So, I'm not going to add much more to that, because I really want to be part of the panel discussion when we talk a little bit more. Just to know that Orange County, even though We are not a tier rural county. We are a rural county. 60% of the county, if not more, is rural. But Orange County is not thought of as a rural county, and we don't classify as a rural county, which is unfortunate because then we miss out on some of that funding that's really important to our local growers. You know, as we continue to talk about that, we got to think about also farming as economic development. And that's why we do award grants, and we continue to have programs in the county called, we have one called the VAD program, which is Volunteer Agricultural District. And what happens is farmers actually put their land into an agricultural district, which means that it can't be developed into anything else but a farm. So if they sell their land and they move it on to the next generation, or they move it on to another person that wants to come and purchase their land, they can't turn it into a cul-de-sac. It has to remain in the farm district. And there's certain parameters around it. Some are lifetime, some are, you know, 100 years. I know we all hear that 100 year, the 99 year, right? We hear that a lot. And some are 49 years. So the idea behind that all, though, is to keep rural orange, and, you know, with the rural buffer, keep the parts that we want to densify down in the southern part of the county. So with that, I'm going to, you know, ease up and start listening to the questions and play off of these wonderful women who are here. I know they've got a whole lot more background in this, but I think with our mix, we're gonna do a good job tonight for you all. So thank you for having us.
Well, thank you. And I've got some questions that folks have already submitted, so I'll jump into it. But I should say at the bottom of your screen, if you're attending, there's a Q&A and a chat. If you have questions you'd like to get to these panelists, please submit them through the Q&A function, and we'll make sure and get those questions out to them. So I'll jump right into it. And you all touched on this. I think it was Jenna who mentioned that you think of farms, you think of the big ones out east. And of course, we're talking about urban farming. And so you touched on some examples, and I saw Natalie engaged in the chat talking about a farm, you know, to introduce kids to farming. I mean, give us a sense in your respective areas of the triangle where you're from, and what kinds of urban farming is there? What kinds of activity do you have in your counties? Natalie, we can go in the same order you introduced yourselves if you want.
Yeah, I'll start with the hub farm that came up in the chat. And I just think it's just such a great example of, you know, having a physical space where students can come together and not only to learn more about agriculture, particularly our students of color. So many studies show that, you know, when kids are outside, when they're more engaged, they aren't sitting in a classroom, which right now is probably safer with COVID anyway. They, you know, whatever, you know, elements you may, you know, think children have or whatever they're diagnosed with, a lot of that gets better when they are engaged outside, and not just in North Carolina. When I was still a soil and water district supervisor, we had one of our conferences in Tennessee, and they have a planner that works at the school district level, and all she does is how can we engage our students, you know, in regards to agriculture and the environment. If a school wants to, if they want to have a garden, you know, on their campus, if they want to have a cistern, whatever that curriculum looks like, she works with the school board to figure that out and to provide them with all the resources that they can have. Our planners in Durham, I still call the Soil and Water District, my board and my staff, award-winning. The Durham public school system provided an award to one of our staff members because of the great work that they were doing working in our school district. And there's so much overlap that we actually started attending those school board meetings on a regular basis. So the environmental piece and the educational piece, love that overlap with urban agriculture. And the other piece that I wanted to do more with, and was very well publicized, I really wanted to engage more with our public housing units. So with DHA, literally a month before, unfortunately, everything unfolded at McDougall Terrace, and we had some other environmental justice issues to watch out for. We wanted to work with them to have a farm. I was canvassing with another organization, And we were knocking door to door, and they said, yeah, we want a community farm. We want to be able to have our own, garden here, where we can have our own access to food. And we were working as a soil and water district to get everything laid out. And unfortunately, we had a lot of residents had to move. But I think particularly when it comes to, your neighbors that may not have access to the best resources, there's such a great connection to urban agriculture and food insecurity issues, to getting folks better access to fresh and healthy food. I'm also excited about a national movement where churches are doing more work in this space as well. They may have a community garden at their church. We already view a lot of church and faith-based centers as community gathering places. So why not also say, okay, every Friday, come to the church. You can, either pick what you want, or it's picked and it's in the fellowship hall. There is a pastor actually out of Baltimore that goes all over the Southeast, and he works with churches to, I think some of them call it freedom farms. It's also kind of connected to, Black liberation, to say, let's be completely sustainable. Let's not just beg for grocery stores to come to our neighborhoods, as they should, but if they don't, why can't we provide at a minimum produce just for local communities? And I think the other piece with urban ag is really just the educational aspect, even for adults, whether it's an urban greenhouse. In the midst of COVID, we couldn't get the project off the ground. But we were working on a really exciting project in Durham County where a chef was looking at a piece of land to not only have a commissary for food trucks, but also a greenhouse where folks could just learn, hey, if I want to grow something in my backyard, how do I do that? What does that look like? So I love when there's an overlap with urban ag and economic development, as well as just exposure. So many folks that maybe were born and raised in urban areas just have no exposure to how do they even get their food, so whether it's a student or an adult, there's so much benefit to urban agriculture. And in closing, we'll add, I think, particularly since I represent Durham County and the southern part of Durham County, a lot of our farms are in the northern part of Durham. You have, Bahama, Trayburn, that's where a lot of our farms are. But I think we need more legislators that you may represent an urban area, but you are fully aware of rural issues. And as Jenna knows, agriculture is actually the #1 industry in North Carolina. And I think a lot of our division comes from urban legislators that don't have a reference point of what rural anything is. And for me to come in and say, hey, Senator Jackson, I know you're a farmer. I'm coming to your farm. Let's talk about industrial hemp. It goes a lot farther when you can connect with those legislators and say, I've been on a farm. I know what your challenges are. Let's talk about the future of agriculture here in North Carolina as an urban senator.
Thanks for that. And Jenna, kicking it over to you, there's a question in the Q&A that sort of feeds off what we're talking about. And Natalie gave some great examples, but I mean, you go all around the state on your campaign. If you had to tell somebody from the city, what is an urban farm? What are some other examples besides the one Natalie gave?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the best way for me kind of to tackle this is what I'm going to do is I want to give you a quick bird's eye view of what ag looks like in the whole state. Just very quick, some top line figures, because like Senator Murdock mentioned, most folks don't realize agriculture is still our state's biggest and most economically important industry that employs so many folks. But for those of us that live in the Triangle, we may be further and further removed from that as we've seen increased development. And so I think it's really important to understand the level that we're operating at with agriculturally in this state. And then I'll go into kind of what the definition of the urban farm is and some issues with that. And then kind of what some brief examples of urban ag in Wake, and then throughout the state that I think are really, really great examples that also kind of parse the idea of doing agricultural work with economic development work. Because again, I mean, and just like, Mr. Rich was talking about too, I mean, that's so important, right? And I think that's really a great message to drive home because it is a way to lift up entire communities. So agriculture, again, is our most important industry. Most folks don't realize there's still something like 49,500 farms in the state of North Carolina, situated on roughly 8.4 million acres. Now, the average size of a farm, and this is, I feel like for anybody in the Triangle, they're like, that sounds massive. what the average acreage size of a farm in North Carolina is actually, I think, 168 acres. And I know that sounds massive to most of us, but by USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture standards, and excuse any of us, especially Senator Murdock and I, if we use too many acronyms, because the world of conservation and agriculture is alphabet soup. But USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, their classification for what is considered a small farm is 172 acres or less. So our average acreage size here in North Carolina falls at 168 acres, which means that the bulk of our farms are actually considered small family farms by national standards. And so what's really interesting, you know, as you alluded to, traveling across the state, I'll see farms, especially like in Western North Carolina, up in the mountains, just because of geography, like that are 10 acres or less. Same thing in the Triangle. I'll see smaller farms in these urban settings because you just don't have 10 acres in the middle of downtown Raleigh, right? Or downtown Durham or Chapel Hill or Carrboro. And so, you know, the other thing I will say about the agricultural industry, as far as economic value, that's just been increasing over the last few years too. So like the last time we had stats, it was 98. Agriculture amounted to $91.8 billion annually to the North Carolina economy. New figures just came out a couple weeks ago. Now that's $92.7 billion annually to the North Carolina economy. I mean, that's a lot of money, y'all. And the agricultural industry in any way, shape, or form employs over 770,000 people in this state. And so, you know, when you think about agriculture, the North Carolina Department of Agriculture has one of the largest state budgets. But what really upsets me is that one of the divisions within the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, I don't think is being funded to the degree it should be, which is the one that oversees all small farms, all minority owned and run farms, all organic farms, non-traditional farms, urban farms, research related to that. And it's one of the smaller budget allocations in the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. And I'm someone who believes that our budget should absolutely reflect our values and priorities in society. And so if you want to really be the change in government, you've got to make sure that you have the money necessary to fund the priorities that are important to you. Just like I want to create a division within the North Carolina Department of Agriculture that is solely responsible for addressing climate change and resiliency building and looking at regenerative ag, soil health, looking at new age farming techniques, because I think we absolutely have no other choice. And obviously urban ag would fall under this because a lot of that work, I mean, when you talk about sustainable development, green roofs, right? I mean, you could have a rooftop garden. I mean, this could be an example of urban agriculture for the person who's asking what exactly is an urban farm. Well, there's not one great, perfect example. You know, there's people who have community gardens. There's restaurants that, you know, right next to them, they have a garden where, you know, like Raleigh City Farm right next to, you know, restaurants in downtown where they grow some of their own produce. And you know, so urban farm, I think just basically somewhere that's located kind of maybe within a city limit or a more urban setting. It's not maybe what you typically would imagine when someone says farm and you're thinking of a big old red barn and a, you know, sprawling rolling hills. And so, you know, I think one of the problems in North Carolina right now is how we legally and economically define what is a farm. So, you know, so by certain standards, there is one definition which says, and I think more urban farmers may fall under this, but it's still kind of difficult for them if they're getting off the ground, is that you produce at least $1,000 of agricultural products or commodity annually. You know, that for some farmers is difficult too. They're like, oh, well, does that include the profit margin? Like, what are we talking about? Like, but I know some small backyard farmers that are growing high-end organic herbs that are actually more financially profitable than some of these large farms that receive subsidies and bailouts. And I would love to think of a future where we aren't subsidizing and bailing out people, but instead encouraging them to transition into practices that make the most sense, especially as we're going to have a harder time feeding people. We're going to face more issues with climate change and environmental issues. We're already facing major environmental justice issues, especially in rural communities. And so, you know, when I think about Wake County, what are some great urban farm examples? The Good Hope Farm in Parry is one of those examples I talked about where you basically kind of pay to rent like a row or two. And, you know, you have access to cold storage, you have access to equipment, to tractors, to irrigators and sprayers. You have access to all that, hoop houses, greenhouses, and people that will help you along the way. And so that's a great example. something else is at schools. I mean, so the Franciscan school, which is a Catholic private school, for years, they've been putting cisterns and doing rainwater recycling. They have a rain garden. There's ways to teach children to be inspired and excited. And every single Earth Day, except for this past one, they have a whole bunch of speakers that are knowledgeable in everything from talking about taking care of bees and creating pollinator-friendly gardens, to having soil and water supervisors, to having climatologists come in and sit with the children all day long and do like informative interactive sessions. So that's a way that you kind of pair the two together. And one of the last examples I just want y'all to be aware of is there's a group of women called Blue Ridge Women in Agriculture up in the mountains, especially near Watauga County. And they have been working with a group to basically create like a food incubator project and a local food system that works. And so a lot of times big ag folks are like, oh, well, they're not economically profitable, they're not sustainable, but they are. So this group has been able to like more than double the amount of money they're bringing in for local farmers, because the money, they take a very small amount of money, what happens at the High Country Food Club in Boone. And so people go online, they learn about each of their individual producers, they decide what they want to buy, and then the next week they go and they physically pick it up after they paid for it. Most of the money goes directly to the farmer. There's also value added products as well, so those jams, jellies, other like salted nuts, because a lot of folks may not know what value added means in agriculture, but people want to buy local. And I think, as Commissioner Rich alluded to, I think that's even more so the case after they've seen these large scale disruptions in our food system as a result of COVID.
Thanks, Jenna. And Penny, we'll kick to you to give us some highlights of what may be going on in Orange County, but also sort of monitoring the Q&A and going a little bit out of order. One of the later ones that came in that I think you might be able to add some perspective on is to what extent green spaces, gardens, urban farms, these kinds of things are factored in to like local planning, to city planning, and how that works, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so let's hit that first, and then I'll tag on to what Senator and Jenna just spoke about. So out in the county, we don't do a whole lot of development. And so when we talk about green space, development out in the county is already green space. When you see cul-de-sacs out in the county, that means that, there's maybe 5 houses and they're 2 miles apart. So that's not what we're talking about. When you're talking about urban green space, that is built into most projects that are now presented to both Chapel Hill and Carborough. And I believe Hillsborough too. So you can't really build unless you have added some green space in. Green space doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have an urban farm. It just means that you have open space where people can, like Weaver Street Market, for example, in front of Weaver Street Market is considered a green space where you can come and you sit and you hang out. So there are places that enjoy some urban farming. I know there's a farm on campus at UNC campus. I don't know who is monitoring that right now. But the food that they grow there was going to the IFC and the homeless. And so that's something when you think about urban farming, where does that food go to, especially if it's a volunteer farm? Smaller scale backyard gardens. I'm not sure if the senator spoke about that or if it was Jenna, but backyard gardens, we have a lot in Orange County. We have some community gardens and farms. In Carborough, Carborough Community Garden is a large community garden where folks, they have, I think Jenna talked about, you have a strip of land. Well, that's what you have right here on the edge of Carborough. And you go and you take care of your piece of land and you can barter some of your, you grow too many tomatoes, you barter that off for someone that's growing peppers. And it's just a happy existence. So you don't have to grow everything yourself because you know that your neighbor is going to be growing something else and you can barter that off. Funny story for me is during the day, I'm a personal chef. I'm not doing that right now because of COVID, but I'm often given buckets and barrels of stuff to create. And so recently a friend of mine said, I have some extra tomatoes. Do you want them? I said, yeah, sure. She gave me a bucket of tomatoes. I mean, literally, like, and what do I do with it? Oh, well, I made soup. I made, just everything that you could possibly think of, I made out of that bucket. So there's a lot of that going on, that bartering and that sharing that happens with community gardens. It's just, it really, it doesn't happen as much in the larger spaces. It's the smaller ones. And so I also want to talk about something called transplanting traditions. And I don't know if Jenna and the senator know about this, but it's immigrant women who have started farming and producing sort of catering, and they've done a couple of events for Orange County. And what they're growing on their farm is from their country. So from Burma and Somalia and things that we wouldn't traditionally grow in North Carolina, they're finding that the soil can actually handle it, and they are growing it here. And so they're able to make a living. And, we talk about the economic development benefits from it. These are women that couldn't really think about what they were going to do before, but then they started this transplanting traditions. And it's a wonderful space that they have, and they really are doing, they're doing a great job. We also have, and I think Senator Murdock, you probably know Kamal Bell, who has started a farm, and he was more interested in getting young African-American, I want to say that were boys turning into men, but kind of getting in trouble and bored and, not having sort of structure in their life. And he brought them out he brings them out onto the farm. So it's part of our diversion plan in the county. Instead of, you're doing community service, oh no, you're going out to the farm. And Kamal gets a hold of them, and he literally is teaching them how to use the land and become farmers. And the program has been extremely successful because these young men are not repeat offenders. They are learning so much, and would not have that opportunity without these small sort of urban farms, even though that is out in the county. So we're going to call it a rural farm, but like Jenna said, our rural farms are much smaller than what the state considers a small farm. The gardens that are at the schools, I think, are so important. The kids get out there every day. I know y'all just spoke a little bit about that. But one of the things that I like about what we're seeing in some of the urban areas is the urban landscape. So spaces that do have edible landscapes, for example, and there you can walk around Carborough in the restaurants, and I mean, you could literally just pick some rosemary out of the pots that they're growing for the pizza. So that edible landscape is really great. As well as the canopies. You can see some of the urban farming is a canopy, which a lot of people wouldn't consider a farm, but it is. And some of the shrubs that are ground level, also again, herbs, just fantastic for the restaurants. So we need to be real careful when we start thinking about what isn't or is an urban farm, and especially when you start educating the young kids to go out and pick tonight's dinner. What are we going to make? That's something as a chef that I love to do. It's not like you open up the box and here's what you got. No, I mean, you go outside and you pick and you decide what you're going to have for dinner. So yeah, I'm going to hold up there, but I just want to get back to the original question of the green space. I think it is important to understand that, I think, I'm not sure who said it, the Senator or Jenna, about understanding how to incorporate green space and sort of these urban farms into city living. It's not that difficult. It can be done. And we are seeing that it really did work during COVID. So with that, I'll hold up and we can move on to some of the other folks' questions.
Thanks, Penny.
One quick follow-up, the commissioner inspired me. Is Benevolence Farms also in Orange County? There's also a farm where if you are a woman that was recently incarcerated and they are working on farms. I spent some time at the Department of Justice and I couldn't believe I didn't know about this program, but it can reform children and it can reform adults. And I just think it's really underreported that, when folks are just outside and connected with nature, how it can just really, really change folks' lives. So that's another example of how you can, use it as a tool for reentry. And that's something that I want to explore more as well as a senator.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. It is. And also those women on the farm do also take cooking classes and learn how to use some of the produce that they've never seen before or used before. And I think they also have a lot of baking classes out there. So they are teaching women, and again, a good program, and it's another diversion program that helps people maybe have a career after they get out of jail. Yeah.
And I think they also make soap, like as a value added like thing.
They
You
do.
have candle soap, like all of that baskets, like all of those things are actually kind of like agricultural based projects. I think something else too, sorry, I know Alan's like ready to go for like the next question, but also, the whole, how you define what a farm is too, besides for that legal $1,000 definition, I think something else that's really, I think eventually as we see more urban farms, it will have to be changed. There's something called present use value. So basically, the value that you're taxed at for your land, if it's in certain types of farming, is less than, like, say, if you were just that was just residential or commercial use. And so, but those limits are something like 5 acres for horticulture, I think 10 for just regular ag or livestock, and like 15 or something for forestry, I think, acres. But there's a lot of urban farmers that don't quite meet those definitions. I hear that all the time in Western North Carolina, and they're like, we don't want to sell, people outside of Asheville, or they're like, we don't want to have to sell our land, but like, we're getting offered like $1 million to like sell it to developers, but we're creating these amazing agricultural products, but we don't get recognized as farmers under the tax code here in North Carolina for present use value. And I think that's something I know I'm interested in addressing as commissioner. And I think, Senator, this is a great project that, we could work on and talk about, because I think that's something we have to evolve.
Yeah, that is a huge issue. And, it did come on my radar. We attempted to do something unsuccessfully. I did it behind the scenes as a soil and water supervisor. But I think also, to add to this discussion, that's a perfect example that Jenna just described of when you don't really respect what urban agriculture is, it can't grow as an industry if the state doesn't provide it with the benefits that other, more rural farmers can benefit from. If you say, oh, you think you're a farm, but since you're small, I don't really think that you're a farm. I don't really respect you as a farm, and I'm not giving you the tax benefit of being a farmer. So that is one of the many issues that if we had, more folks in leadership that really acknowledge urban farming, we're cutting ourselves off at the feet by not doing something basic like providing a tax benefit by doing it.
Well, Senator Murdock, sticking with you, because I think you touched on this earlier, and we got a good question in the Q&A about the importance of addressing food deserts and improving access to healthy local food, and how this all relates to that. And maybe you can give us your thoughts on what we can do better and how we can use this as a tool to address that problem.
Absolutely. We're doing a little bit better. I will highlight right here in Durham, one of my interns on my soil and water campaign for his master's projects researched food deserts around North Carolina Central University. Some of the closest places to eat around the university are, KFC and Burger King. And it just makes no, before Nzinga's, a local Black chef, she created a restaurant close to the area, but just the inability for us to provide quality food to primarily people of color is just insane. Quick plug for the census, was actually informed by Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. When you fill out your census, that helps all of these companies to decide where are they going to place their grocery stores. So that's another reason for folks to fill out the census. But when it comes to food insecurity, I mean, just back to the mantra of I campaign on your zip code should not determine whether you live or die. And you just see a direct correlation to your inability to have access to food. If you don't live in the right area, I guarantee you can know the wealth of a neighborhood by, is there a Whole Foods? A Whole Foods is never going to be in an area that is not doing well, that's not affluent, but they do their research and say, okay, we need to go to these areas. When I used to live close to Duke University, I would go down 15501 to go to Trader Joe's, So there's just so much work that we need to do in that space. But it is encouraging, again, when you have more legislators and more leaders that are passionate about it. I really believe in a lot of, before I get into some legislative work that's preceded me, I'm interested in hybrid models that aren't always that sexy, whether that be like a pop-up shop. When I lived in Asheville, there was a truck, and it was essentially a farmer's market that came to your apartment complex. And just being the food geek that I am, I just happened to notice it on our board and knew that they came to my apartment complex on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I would go up on Tuesdays and Thursdays on my lunch hour and get, my collard greens, my sweet potatoes, whatever they had. They would list, this is what we have. And, it was just a couple that was just passionate and said, we're going to take a truck and take the food to the people. So I think that there's some temporary fixes that we can have. We've had amazing success in Durham, and Wake County is doing more with that, with our Black Farmers Market, to integrate not only food insecurity, but how can you diversify, food system, help some of these farmers to get a following by bringing them into these urban areas where folks will say, yeah, I'll come to your farm to get, X, Y, and Z. And another one that isn't as sexy, but whatever corner markets you have, just work with them to say, we got to do a better job by having, some area where we can get more local food or some sort of produce. COVID-19 has been a stress test for all of our systems, and our supply chains aren't that great. And I think if we were to incorporate more local food, we can meet that demand better than some of what we have in place. As a part of our COVID bill, we provided funds if folks already had a meat processor, that we would help them to expand. I think that's kind of one small step, but I think we have to support the infrastructure to say, how can we really, really take food insecurity seriously? And my soror and candidate for Lieutenant Governor, Yvonne Holley, she did successfully pass a bill and got it funded to deal with some food insecurity issues. The same thing in Southeast Raleigh. She was just frustrated that, why is there not a grocery store? Why do we not have access to fresh and healthy food? And it's something that you definitely can tackle locally if you have the political will. We do have a council in Durham that is taking this very seriously, and it is a very diverse group. Our mayor, Mayor Schull, has been very hands-on with the work that group is doing. But we definitely have a long way to go, because health outcomes, whether it's asthma, obesity, all of these health issues, a lot of them are connected to the inability to have true access to fresh and healthy food that isn't processed.
Thank you. And Jenna, kicking it over to you, if you see in the Q&A where there's a question about the hog farms and the pollution, and again, sort of a distinction between these big farms and the small farms we've been talking about, maybe you could speak a little bit to that, and maybe in the context of that, obviously we're all environmentalists on this call. What would be some of the environmental benefits of urban farming?
So first, just briefly, I would say Senator Murdock touched on something that's really near and dear to my heart, which is addressing food insecurity. And just like, as she alluded to, Representative Yvonne Lewis Holley's running for Lieutenant Governor, she regularly says, just because you grew up on a farm or next to a farm doesn't mean that you don't live in a food desert either. And part of that's because we've been, and this kind of connects those two pieces of these hog farms. What you're seeing, we've become a society where monocrops or monoculture is the norm, because that's, the way that farmers see is the only way to be economically profitable is to grow or produce in bulk. I think for too long in this country, we've subsidized the wrong things. I mean, look, federal dairy has been operating at a loss for over a decade. Meanwhile, North Carolina used to have a ton of small dairies, especially up west. And now, there's maybe counties where there were hundreds, there's maybe 2 that are still standing. So we've subsidized the wrong things for too long. Part of that's because those big producers, a lot of the same ones who own all these farms and that contract with our local farmers here, that own all these hog and poultry operations down east, they have the political power, especially on the federal level when it comes to lobbying, to be able to skirt certain regulations. Also, they don't care about complying with labor or environmental standards. As soon as it's cheaper to go somewhere else and produce whatever they're having produced, they will absolutely do that, and they will leave and upend that community without the resources necessary to recover. It's cheaper for them to stay tied up in litigation for years than to pay out claims. I mean, that's what you're going to see with these lawsuits down east. you know, again, like I alluded to earlier, most farmers just want to be good neighbors. A lot of farmers I know that contracted with those people, they didn't want to, but they felt like they had no other choice. Again, because of the lack of leadership, they didn't have any other options. But if they see all their other neighbors, you know, contracting with Smithfield or Purdue or with Prestige, you know, they can't, it costs more to sustainably and ethically and morally produce a product at the local level as a small farmer than what it does for somebody who's doing so much in bulk or in aggregate. And so they were going to lose the farm that had been in their family, some of them for generations, 100 years or more, unless they contract it with some of these big producers. And some of them don't want to, and they hate it. I mean, I had people call me and they just, you know, crying, and they're like, you know, we tried to bring the technology possible to put solar on all the roofs of these hog houses, or to pump out, and there's the science and technology is available to separate the chemical components that's in lagoons from, you know, from waste to nutrients to what could be used for fertilizer. I mean, all of that's there, but Smithfield and Purdue and them, they don't want to have to pay for it. Same thing to use, you know, to put covers on lagoons and put that energy back into the biogas pipeline. There's things that could be done, but because there's a lack of leadership on both the state and federal level in agriculture right now, it's not going to happen. And until you aren't electing folks that are taking checks from the people who own all the major, like, corporate, you know, hog and swine organizations, nothing's ever going to change. And so when you talk about agriculture, I mean, there's a reason why there were these major disruptions in the food system when COVID-19 happened, because we've allowed for consolidation to happen. And consolidation has meant that, you know, there's only, I have it written somewhere, there's only like 4 major meat packers who literally control almost the whole entire meat industry in this country. So Tyson, JBS, National Beef, and Cargill. And they own 85% of beef in America. They own 66% of pork and roughly 50% of chicken and poultry. And of course there's going to be disruptions. We have literally set them up so they could fail. And, you know, I tell people, most folks don't realize the actual price that they should be paying for a gallon of milk or a dozen eggs or a loaf of bread if it was sustainably, ethically, and morally produced. And yes, you're going to pay more when you go to your local farmer, but they usually are exercising better environmental practices, better labor practices. You're keeping jobs and money right there in your local community. And, you know, at the end of the day, that quality product, there's a difference. And I get that it's hard to ask most Americans to pay a few bucks more for those kitchen staples, because in fairness, most wages have stayed stagnant since the 70s in this country, which is another reason why I am a fan of a living wage, not just a minimum wage. We have to pay people what they earned. I don't think healthcare should be tied to employment. All of these things are connected. And it's so important that you have people leading the agricultural industry who see those interconnections to understand that, yes, there's going to be food deserts because most people can't afford to have something that was produced because it costs more for that high quality, more nutritious product. Despite the fact that right now in North Carolina, we grow more food than most places in the whole entire nation, and we're one of the biggest agricultural trading partners in the world. But 1 in 5 children in this state are food insecure. They don't know where their next meal is coming from, or they have parents who have to add water or broth to whatever meal to be able to thin it down to make it go a little bit further. I think that's criminal in a state that grows so much of the nation's food. Most of the farmers I know would love to step in and be able to do something about that to help. And so I want to see a school garden on every class. Like I want to see a garden on every school ground. We can absolutely do that. I want to make sure that we work with our federal partners to expand SNAP benefits. I really appreciate how food banks have stepped up right now as more and more people have gone unemployed or become food insecure during this time. But we can't expect them to do all the heavy lifting. And I saw research that showed for every, and Feeding America has done some amazing work, but for every one person that Feeding America could feed, SNAP, we extended the benefits, could feed 9 people. We already have these projects and these programs in place. We're not utilizing them effectively because we're allowing people to put profits before the actual people that they are serving. And so there's an opportunity to radically change the food system in a way that works for everybody and make sure that, you know, we don't have children in our state going hungry at a crucial time when their brains and muscles are developing, because it's also a national security issue. I mean, these are the next generation of people who will serve in civil service and public service or in our armed forces. And so this is something we absolutely could address and should address immediately.
Well, thanks for that. And I want to be mindful of the time and respectful of your time because I suspect you all have one or two other things to do, but we've got a couple of minutes left. And so if I could get you like in a minute each, you can touch on either or both of the following, since we got more questions than we can get answered. One, I think several of our members would love to hear what your favorite local farm or locally grown North Carolina food item is. And number two, since we're running out of time for more substantive answers, if you want to give us any thoughts on where folks on this call could go to find out more, if they're interested and intrigued by what they've heard, where would you point them to get more answers? And Penny, why don't you start us off and try to keep
Yeah,
it.
that's great. I do want to start. I'm just going to add real quick to the food desert. We have a local food council in Orange County that is part of our government. It's kind of a rare thing that the food council is part of the government, but it is. They did a study on food deserts, and UNC was a food desert. And I know we don't think about that. They now have a Target that has craft food for them to go, but UNC is literally a food desert, and it's bizarre that there's still not really a grocery store in the downtown Franklin Street area. You can go to Weaver Street over in Carborough and you have a Harris Teeter, but if you're just talking about students that are on campus and they don't have access to cars and they can only take the bus, there's nothing within walking distance that resembles a supermarket. So my favorite food that when I came south, there's two of them. One is sweet potatoes, and April McGregor, who used to be the farmer's daughter over at the Carborough Food what can I think of that? The farmer's market. She also made sauerkraut, but she grew up on a sweet potato farm in Mississippi, and so that was one of the first things I learned how to cook when I came down here. And I love collard greens. You didn't eat them in New York City, period. There was just not collard greens in New York City. And the first time I tasted them, I was just like, wow. I mean, I looked at my mother and was like, how come we didn't have that? And she says, I'm a Jew from New York. Who knows anything about collard greens? So, I mean, it's true. Like, we didn't grow up on that. My kids grew up on collard greens. They love it. Splash of balsamic vinegar. They are set. And so, I think that's something that I joke around a lot, but I think it's so important that that we introduce different foods to young people early on. One of the things that I've done over my time here is volunteered at the IFC, at the food shelter, and also at the women's shelter. And when the women's shelter gets fresh vegetables in, and these women look at me like, what do I do with this? And I'm talking about things as zucchini and squash. They just didn't know how to cook it. I think we're failing our children when we don't explore different ways to cook different vegetables and teach them about all different vegetables. Yeah, I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with sweet potatoes and collards. I also do want to say I think that hemp and marijuana should be legalized. I think it is just another way of keeping young Black boys in jail, because we know that they get arrested for marijuana use more than any group right now. And it was, that whole Just Say No, the Ronald Reagan, that was just a cover up to arrest young Black boys. So yes, let's legalize it. That becomes a good agricultural economic development for our state, and we can stop arresting people. So that's it. I'm going to move on. So sweet potatoes, collard greens, and marijuana.
Thank you, Commissioner Rich. Senator Murdock, what about you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Commissioner. I'm excited to follow up with some of the same points that you brought up, but also since Jenna did bring up food banks, just did want to highlight in this moment, just so many families are really struggling and having a hard time. We have all seen the lines where anyone that's in the food bank business know that we are struggling. And to Jenna's point, to just talk about inequity, right? So in our state budget funding, it's a public document. In one of our COVID relief bills, we provided $7 million to our food banks, but $20 million to depopulate farms. Because of the way that our food structure is set up, we can't fit all the animals on these farms at the same time. So we're taking that $20 million to depopulate farms instead of actually feeding families, and we can't figure out a way to feed families with extra food that's just laying around and we're pouring out milk in other parts of the state. So just want to highlight, we really have to figure out these food chain issues that we really could alleviate if we supported our small farms and our local farms a lot more. I want to highlight that. And I also will be penning a letter, was working on it today with some groups for parents out there. In Durham, I believe about 60% of our students are on free or either reduced lunch. And the waiver for the summer feeding program is going to expire on August 31st. So a number of organizations, we are reaching out to the USDA, Ag Committee members at US Congress. So I will be penning a letter asking that they provide that extension. We're already having a hard enough time with our teachers keeping up. The last thing they need to do is say, okay, now we got to figure out more paperwork to, feed folks in a different way opposed to the summer feeding model, which is a lot easier. Also just got to do all we can to continue to provide funding to farmers. Again, if we were more forward thinking, helping farmers to find other industries, to really lay out there, how can you do something else? How can you be more sustainable? Some of the technology that Jenna mentioned, having grants to say, we will help you to do this, and working with our private partners to figure out how to be more healthy and how to be more sustainable. And with legalization of marijuana, I have to bring that up because since this is a Sierra Club event, this is a nonpartisan event, but you can look me up. You'll know what side I am on in the issue, and it's not going to be easy. I think that even though I'm optimistic that we'll have changes in North Carolina, we're really going to have to push. And I'm excited about decriminalization. I spent a lot of time at the Department of Justice. Not only do we need to stop locking up Black and brown people behind marijuana, and it also in the middle of this pandemic, if you look at governments where it is legalized, these local governments that can utilize that tax revenue are elated that they have a way to help them pay the bills, whether they be a city or a county. Portland, California, sales are through the roof. So it also is another way to generate revenue. Also really inspired by the model in Illinois where 30% of those funds of marijuana sales are utilized for restorative justice programs. What we're also finding is we are doing a lot of early release programs with inmates, as we should, but we don't have the reentry council support at the regional level to support our brothers and sisters that are coming home. And it provides another revenue stream to support all these great criminal justice reforms that we need when all of our budgets are really stretched thin because of the pandemic. So many reasons to decriminalize, legalize, and also I support the creation of a blue ribbon commission is what I'll call it, that really looks at what does that path look like. We have a model in North Carolina with liquor sales. We have ABC stores. We have a model. We just need to figure out in North Carolina, it's coming. It will be legal at some point. If we don't have these discussions, we're going to fall flat on our face. So we need to really get serious about when marijuana becomes legal, what do we do? We need to advocate for it. We need community partners like the Sierra Club to help us to make that happen. And my favorites in North Carolina are white corn, collard greens. Love sweet potatoes. I miss the purple sweet potatoes. There were some farmers out west. I used to get purple sweet potatoes from them, and I really miss that. And also, in memory of my father, I lost him in April. He had a garden in our backyard, so I used to go home and get tomatoes, and I really miss doing that. So shout out to him. He's a city slicker, but had that farm at home, and miss going home and getting tomatoes.
Well, thank you. And before I kick it over to soon-to-be Commissioner Wadsworth to close us out, I just want to thank all three of you. I know how busy you are. This has been fantastic. And as you can see from the questions that we didn't even get to, everybody on this call would love to hear from you for a couple more hours about this topic. And I will just say for my part, following up on Senator Murdock, I think the most important thing any of us can do on this issue and so many others we care about is elect folks like these three. These are the kind of people we need serving in office. And as you probably know, we have a Sierra Club PAC. And in addition, I saw Jenna put in the comments her website. If you have any questions, I'll put my email in there. Feel free to follow up with me as the State Political Committee Chair. If you are interested in the work we do endorsing candidates like these three and raising money for them and volunteering through our members to get good folks elected, reach out to me. But soon to be Commissioner Wadsworth, why don't you take it away?
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I just want to briefly first talk on one of the bills that Senator Murdock was talking about. I don't know if it's quite the same one. Right before like one of the bill drafting deadlines, a couple senators called me and said, Jenna, what can we do to support the agricultural industry? And I was like, I wish you would give me more than a couple hours, because I literally like listed out 20 different bill ideas that have been stewing around in my mind for ways that we could support our agricultural producers, especially during COVID. And so one of them that was birthed out of one of my ideas was Senate Bill 776, was the Small Farmers Relief Act, the COVID-19 Small Farmers Relief Act. And so as I saw, there were things like milk being dumped all over the place, or we were having a problem with H-2A visas and having adequate access to farm laborers, because we had a backup in meat processing capacity. So a lot of farmers had, tons of waste. They had tons of products that were either rotting in fields because they didn't have access to labor, or it was too expensive for them to have to like pay for someone to pick it and transport it. And then there wasn't the market for it because restaurants and schools were no longer seeking food because of what happened with coronavirus and the shutdown. And so I was like, well, at the same time, we're seeing these food banks experience unprecedented levels of demand. That demand is going to increase as more and more people are going bankrupt, or they're unable to pay their rent, or they lose their jobs, or they lose their health insurance. And how can we get the food from our farmers to the places that need it most? So our children, our churches, our nonprofits that are doing this work of feeding people who need that access to that healthy, nutritious food in our communities, but also give farmers basically a tax write-off for donating their food, so they still get some sort of, kind of payment or return, so that way, they don't just literally lose all that money in revenue that they've invested for that season. And so I was like, I feel like this is such a simple idea. Like, you're feeding people, you're also taking care of farmers, you're talking about economic viability, and this would be something that also there'd be research dollars that go into our like ag research centers and developing and strengthening the food distribution networks and pipelines, so that way if there's ever any other natural disasters or environmental issues or viruses or pandemics in the future, you could use this legislation to, whenever there's a state of emergency, do the same sort of thing. And I thought it was a great idea. I was like, surely Republicans could agree with this. Unfortunately, they did not, and the bill got stalled in committee. And again, this is, the problem to me with just in general electing anybody who puts profits or partisan ideologies before actually serving the people that they're elected to represent. And you have, I think, an opportunity come this fall to really look long and hard and say, what can you yourself make sure to do to make sure that we can change this? Because clearly the system is broken. And the thing is, it's been broken for a lot of people for a very long time. I think that COVID-19 has just exacerbated some of those real discrepancies we're facing, not just with access to food, but with access to technology, with access to healthcare in our society, with access to transportation. And so these are things that we have to address. I think urban agriculture holds a vital key in making sure that we address some of those big issues going forward. And, as far as crops that I absolutely love, I plant so many of them. I always like to say kale, yeah. I love my maters. A number of different folks sang this song, but my favorite rendition is John Denver's. There's only two things that money can't buy, and that's true love and homegrown tomatoes. And I feel like that's absolutely true. And the last thing to me, because this is something, and one of the bigger reasons why, besides for, wanting to address and fight for addressing climate change through this office, one of the biggest reasons too why I'm running for Commissioner of Agriculture, is kind of that piece that brings together economic, environmental, and social justice, which I believe is the opportunity we have through the legalization of cannabis. So not just reforming the hemp licensure process, which, as I said, is very discriminatory to communities of color. If you've ever had a controlled substance conviction, you're ineligible to compete in the hemp market, even if you've served your time or you've sought treatment. We know who that disproportionately affects. And so when you talk about cannabis legalization, the reality is it's already legal in 33 states, either medicinally, recreationally, or a combination thereof, plus DC. And so it's not a question of if it's going to be legal in North Carolina, it's more of a question of when. And And just like with hemp, like we've been sitting on our hands waiting and not making any real policy, ground on developing policy to make sense for when we are ready to have this industry here in North Carolina. I support the legalization of cannabis, both medicinally and recreationally, just to be entirely clear about that. And, you know, for me, it's not only a huge economic opportunity for our farmers. A lot of our farmers, we've lost 98% of our tobacco trading market to China in recent years. A lot of these farmers are very well positioned to move into this market. But when we do have legalization, to me, it's really important to make sure that we have an equitable cannabis industry. And, you know, and so maybe that means looking at distribution pipelines through historically underutilized businesses. If we don't go through like the ABC system model, making sure that we create a system that works for everybody. And I also don't want large corporately owned conglomerates coming in, buying up large swaths of land from our farmers who are going bankrupt, who've been struggling for the last few years. Maybe there's an acreage allotment or limit to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to participate in this market, while also allowing them then, or encouraging them to diversify their crops. That's how you tackle climate change too. But, you know, it's a way to be able to build up rural communities, reduce brain drain, and expand rural tourism opportunities, combat the opioid epidemic that I would contend that Big Pharma has largely perpetuated in this state. It's a way to fund the priorities in our budget that matter to us, like public education. As someone who is a product of Title I schools and got to go to the School of Science and Math and then NC State, like I am grateful for our educators and teachers that worked hard, long days. My sister is a teacher at a Title I school. But, you know, we're not funding those things adequately in the budget. Michigan and Illinois both brought in millions and millions of dollars in additional tax revenue just in the first few weeks alone of legalization. So this is a huge opportunity. A lot of county budgets, including those of us, most of us in the Triangle and Wake County, we're facing major budget shortfalls as a result of COVID-19. So this absolutely has to happen now if we want to fund the things that really matter in our communities and our urban communities in particular. And I think, you know, most excitingly, the legalization, I believe, is an opportunity to begin to achieve true social justice for communities of color who for too long have been disproportionately locked up on the basis of possession charges versus Caucasian users, despite the fact that white folk and black folk are using cannabis at roughly the exact same rate. And it absolutely is a social justice and equity issue that you have black men sitting in prison right now for doing something that's legal in a propensity of other states across this nation, and they're more likely to contract COVID-19 right now. And so when we do legalize, that has to go hand in hand with decriminalization and also with dismissal of past misdemeanor possession charges, because I believe that's the way you begin to combat the school to prison pipeline. Give black little girls and boys the opportunity to grow up with both their parents, build communities back better, strengthen their opportunities, allow folks to compete in this market, to participate in this market, and economically benefit from this market, because black farmers have 1/10 of the land now that they did a century ago. So there's so many opportunities that we can address through that, and I think that that's something that folks in urban areas should absolutely be fighting for come this November.
Thanks again to all of you. Thanks to everybody for staying on a few minutes late. Again, we could listen to you all talk about this stuff for a long, long time, but you've given us a lot to think about. And with all the great local produce you've talked about, you've also made us hungry. So we'll let everybody go and have a late dinner. But thanks again to all of you for taking the time. It's really been nice.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good night.